Hi and welcome back to the next video. This is video number 5. So this time we are adding authentication for our HTTP API to authenticate a user so that we always know who the user is and later can check, for example, what he is allowed to do, for example, if he's having a role or not. We are also adding or beginning to add real-time communication. So we are using here a Socket.io gateway, so Websockets, and here we also authenticate the user when he's trying to connect against our gateway. And at the end, we are testing our gateway with Postman to see that everything is working correctly. So the structure is as always, we first look at our outcome, then we read the user story, then we implement the story and check against our criteria at the end. And in the description, there are some timestamps, so you can skip to the parts that you're interested in. So let's have a short look at our outcome. So you can see it here. We are having a gateway to handle real-time communication, in our case with Socket.io. And here we authenticate the user if he is trying to connect against our gateway. And we are also having a middleware to authenticate a user if he's trying not to connect via WebSocket or Socket.io, but via normal API or HTTP. So then we have also a middleware here. And just to show you, we are having here in Postman set up, we are trying to connect with Socket.io here against our to-dos namespace. And we are providing him here our valid JWT. And then we can say connect, and we are getting connected, and we could add event listeners to receive messages from our server. And you see it here. Then we are authenticating our user correctly, because here you see if we are not authenticated correctly, then we are getting disconnected. But if we are logging out the user that we are having from the database, and everything is fine. So if I would now disconnect, and I would say we have here false JWT, and I try to connect, you see we are getting directly disconnected. And here we also say disconnect user. So let's start by looking at our story. This is video number 5, and we want to set up authentication for our API and also for our Socket.io gateway. So we want to create this gateway and then at the end test it with Postman. So the story is set up authentication for our API so that the user is always getting authenticated through his own JWT token that he is providing when he requests our API, so that we always know who he is. And then we could, for example, later check, is he allowed to do something? We also want to set up a Socket.io gateway and authenticate the connecting user also there. So we connect or we authenticate the user once for our API and also for our Socket.io gateway. And the gateway is there to enable real-time communication. So for example, for real-time messaging, or when we have our to-do stuff set up, for example, to drag and drop between two lanes, then we can always send an event to the server, and the server can then send an event to all connected clients. And so everyone is seeing what is happening on this to-do board or on this project board. So the criteria are, we want to have authentication for all routes except our register and login route, because there you can't have a JWT. The JWT will be provided or is being provided when you are logging in. And then for all other requests, you will need this JWT. So we have to exclude these two routes. We also want to set up our gateway and authenticate our user on connect. So as soon as he connects to our gateway or tries to, we want to authenticate him. And if he is not having a valid JWT, we want him to directly disconnect. And at the end, we want to test our gateway with Postman. So first, we can read the documentation for Socket.io. And to make it maybe a little bit faster, we first want to install this so it can run in the background. And then we read the documentation. So we cd into our backend API. And then we install nest.js Websockets and platform Socket.io. And we also add here the normal Socket.io package. And now this can run in the background and we will read some stuff. So first, we want to read what is Socket.io? So Socket.io is a library that enables low latency bi-directional and event-based communication between a client and a server, and it's built on top of the WebSocket protocol. So you see we have here like a full duplex and low latency channel between the server and our client, so the browser. And we have here, we implemented like with Node.js. And we can go through this later. Let's see what is interesting. So basically, we can handle like connection, and the client, we can emit like a message to our server, or we can receive a message from our server. So let's see, where are we here? Yeah, I think that is maybe first all we need to know. So we have like a bidirectional fast connection, and we are also like to handle like rooms, so that we can say, for example, we have a chat room with user A and user B, and another with user B and user C, and maybe one room with all of them, and then we can just send like an event to all the users, for example, a message. So this is like the recording page for WebSockets from nest.js. So here it's called like a gateway, and we can use this for HTTP, for WebSockets, for whatever we want. And here we are using Socket.io. And you see it's listening on the same port as our HTTP server, so in our case, port 3000. And yeah, we could give here a different port. And we can also use a namespace, for example, events. So then we would have like localhost 3000/events, where we have to connect against this gateway. So if we connect here, so for example, we can handle events, we can subscribe to a message, and then we can, so for example, if the user sends a message for events, then he would get it here returned directly back. So he's sending like a data body, and we just return the data. And we can always, in this gateway, for example, subscribe to events, or we can then later emit here an event. For example, here we emit like an event with this object, so named nest. And we could also here log it out and do always some stuff. So we also have here like lifecycle hook, so we can implement, for example, on gateway init. This is what we will need if we, I don't know what we could do with it, but basically, when we are starting our application, the on gateway connection we can need, or we will need to authenticate the user. So in this will always be called when the user tries to connect. So here we can just check if the JWT token is there and if it's valid, and then get the user from the database. And we also can handle like a disconnect from the user. Yeah, I think so we can just start by implementing everything. So we have here installed everything. And now, I don't know, it's scanning files to index. But what we can already do is, I think, we can say docker compose up, and then we can develop. So just as a reminder, before I run this, I just cleared like all Docker volumes and images. So I just ran this command, so that everything will work fine. And now we can go into our code here. I hope it's like big enough. And first we want to authenticate like a user from a HTTP request. So we can add like a middleware. So we can just say middleware or out.middleware.ts and add this file. And we can just have a quick look for nest.js request lifecycle. So we could also do the authentication for the API, maybe in a guard or something. But we can see it here. The request lifecycle looks like the following. So first our incoming request, and then we have our middleware here, the module bound one. So we bind this to our app.module. So this will be fired directly, and the guards are coming later. So the interceptors and so on. So we want to have it as early as possible. So we will do this in our authentication middleware. So what we need here is we need like a class, and this we can name out middleware, and we will implement the nest middleware, and then we have to make it injectable. So we do have a constructor, and here we need our out service, and we will need our user service. And for example, the out service, you can see it here. We have like a function to verify the JWT that we can use to validate the JWT. And we have in our user service, we want to get the user from the database to have like the most recent writes from this user. So now we have here like an error, and this say, since we're implementing the nest middleware, we have to implement the member use. So this is like the basic stuff. And here we can simplify this a bit and say we have a request. This is the request model. This, and we have to create it. So I think this is better than using like an any type. So we can just say, one, we are getting the user, and the second, we are getting some headers from our request. And so let's see. So we have here our request model. We have our response. And we have our next function that we can call. So then we can wrap this in a try catch. And we can try first to get the token from the request. So we want to get our token. And this is like an array or string array. And we can get this from our headers, of course. And then we are just getting this from our header that's called authorization. So I just type it correctly, request.headers authorization. And then we split it by a white space. And then we can get like the token. And here we can just use our authentication service to verify the JWT and get the token array at number 1. So yes, I should make this async. And then this should work. Yeah, we will later do this here. So the next thing that we want to do is when we have the token, then we want to make sure that the user exists. So we want to have our user. So we can try to get the user from our database. So we can use our user service and try to get our user. So at the moment we don't have like a function for this. So we have just create, log in, find by email, find one, and username exists. So we still, or we want also to find the user by his ID. So we can, for example, make one to say over the private one. So private always at the bottom. So we can make it here, and we can say async get one by ID, and the ID is the number, and we want to return like a promise for the type user interface, and then we can just return our user repository dot find one or fail. So if it's not finding the user, then it's like throwing, and then we would go into our catch block in our middleware. So then we can, for example, disconnect the user. And we want here to search the user by his ID. And the ID is in our token, so we can use this now. So here we can say get one by ID, and then just from our decoded token, use the ID. So we can say here decoded token. I think here we should get our user and a payload back, and then we can use the ID. And now we can say if we are having a user, then we can add the user. So this is like a best practice in Node.js to our request.user object, and then we have access always to our later. So the request is then being passed to, for example, our controller and so on. And there we can always access the request.user object and see who is the user who's making this call at the moment. And in our else case, we just want to throw like an HTTP exception. And we would say something like unauthorized, and then give like the HTTP status unauthorized. And this would be like the same stuff that we would do here in our catch. So this catch would fire, for example, if we are not finding the user or if we are not verifying JWT here, then it would throw like an exception and we would catch it and then throw an HTTP exception unauthorized. So we can say here throws if the token is not valid. And our user, we can say, for example, here we want to make sure that the user is not deleted. So we could also use, for example, the payload from the token, but this could be like maybe an hour old or something. So to make sure we have the latest one, we can get the user from the database. So we can say, for example, that props changed during the time that the JWT was issued to the user. And here we can say then attach the user object to our request object. So we can access it any time later in our application. And if it would have been set, whatever, we would just override it. So this should be safe to use. And now we have to apply this middleware to our main module. So we can just go to our app.module here. And now we want to implement here our nest module. And then we have to again implement like all the members. So in our case, the configure. And here we have our middleware consumer. And then we have it implemented, so we can say consumer, my mistake, consumer dot apply. And now we want to apply our middleware that we created, so our Auth middleware. And we said we want to exclude the login and the register routes. So we want to exclude them here. So we can say we want to exclude the following routes. So it's like path API users, and our method is our request method dot post. And the second one that we want to exclude is the API users login, and this is also a post. And then we apply this for all other routes. So this should protect or let the middleware fire every time someone tries to connect against our API. And let's see, we also have to add the user service to the exports from our user module so that we can use it. And then we can go over to our WebSocket gateway. So we want to add this gateway in our to-do module, so we can cd into our to-do API, into our source, and into our to-do. And then we can just use the CLI or the schematics to generate our gateway. So we can just say nest generate gateway, and we just name it to-do gateway at the moment. And then we can start there to implement all the stuff. So now you see we have here our to-do gateway. We can move this to a directory. And in our module here, we also want to use the authentication module, or to import the authentication module and the user module, because we still, like in our middleware, we need access to our authentication service and also to our user service. So we can import here our user module, since this is also exporting the user service, and the authentication module. And here we are also exporting our authentication service that we need to use here. So in our gateway, you see we have here a simple handle message hello world. that we can remove at the moment. And now we can try to set things up. So we could give this here a namespace. For example, we can, why is it not giving me success? So we could give it a namespace like to do, or to do's, and then we could, in our constructor, obviously, we will need, we need our user service and our authentication service. So user service and our out service. And then, we can here handle our connection. So what we can do is, to authenticate a user, we can say we want to implement the gateway connection. So as a user connects to our gateway, so this is our life cycle, and we say on gateway connection, and then we implement the async and the connection. And we will also need like a disconnect. This we can make private at the moment. And we can just say here we are getting our socket, so like the connection. And then we can say socket.emit, like to emit something. And we say, let's just say error and say new unauthorized exception. And then we disconnect the user, so we can just say disconnect. And in our handle connection, we are also getting a socket. And you can see it here, this is the main object for interacting with a client. A socket belongs to a given namespace and uses underlying client to communicate. Within each namespace, we can define a channel like rooms, so that our socket, so the user can join and leave. So this is like a convenient way to broadcast to a group of socket instances, so who is connected to our room, for example. So first, we can try to get the token from our from the connection from the user. So we can say here we want to get the token and then use it in our authentication service. So our auth service .verify JWT we can use again, and we can get the token very simple from our socket, then from the handshake, then from our headers, and there we can just call the authorization. So this is like the basic where this should be. And here this is the same as in our authentication middleware. If the token is not verified, this will throw and we can catch and disconnect the user. So we should do this in a try catch. And then we have the token. We want to get the user from our database. So we say if the token is valid, we get the user by ID from our database. So we say just const user, and then we use our user service to get our user by his ID. So we can say our decoded token user.id, and then it's like nearly the same code than in our authentication middleware. If user is not there, then we can disconnect him. So we say, I don't know, console.log disconnect user, and we can say return this dot disconnect. so our private function at the end. And here we have to pass in our socket, so our connection from our client. And else, I don't know, we can console.log do something and add here maybe the user so that we see everything works as we want. And in our catch, we want to also like disconnect the user, so we can just say disconnect user. And we say return disconnect with our socket, so the connection from our client. And so we have like our basic stuff ready, I guess. So let's see if now everything is running here. And then we could try to access all the endpoints or our gateway with Postman. So we can see it here. It seems that everything is starting correctly. And you can also see, let's see if we are seeing here our gateway. Are we seeing it? Well, let's try to connect. So first, what we need to do, we have here Postman, and you need to have an account to use like the WebSocket stuff. So we can make here WebSocket request. And important is that you add it here to change it to socket.io. So then we have just our HTTP localhost port 3000, and then our namespace is to-dos. And now if we try to connect, for example, you see connect and then we immediately disconnect. And you see it here, disconnect user, because we are not having like a valid JWT. So we are directly going into this and then we are getting disconnected. So now what we want to do is we have needed JWT. And this we can use our front end to log in. Or first we need to register a user because I deleted the database. So it's a thomas@thomas.de. And make a simple password so that we can register. Then we can log in. And now we can get our token. So here from our local storage, we have our token. And now we can just add this here to our headers. You remember we are trying to access a key called authorization in our code. So we add our key and our value. And now we try to connect, and now you see we have connected. And you see here we have now our do something user, and our user is correctly. So this is what we are doing here. We are decoding the token. Then we're getting the user, and then we're just here logging out the user do something, because we have then to apply the logic in our next video. So I think this sums it up pretty well. So everything seems to work. So let's have a look at our story and see if we fulfill everything. So we said finished. It was working. So we have like an authentication for all our routes except register and log in, and also for our gateway. We have set up our gateway and authenticate the user on connect, and our gateway worked with Postman. So in our next video, we will do some stuff in the front end to set it also up there. And then we can add like some messages and messaging that we can then use also.